Hello, this is, I suppose, part two of my 3 servers configuration. I'm not actually going to reconfigure DHCP because I've already got it working, but I would like to discuss how it works. So I've got, as you can see, I've got my Debian server up, I've got my Kali client up, and I've got my Debian client up. I'm not going to bring Metasploitable up right now because that's just a little too dangerous. So I'll start with my client. Okay. And it is thinking. I'll go to my Debian, log into it as well. It looks different because these days Kali comes out of the box running XCFE, and Debian comes out of the box running. Actually, I think I actually used the. Oh, by the naming convention, I used the net install ISO, which uses GNOME. There's also an XCFE image of Debian. Now, if you really want, say, Cinnamon or Mate or LXDE or KDE or whatnot, you can choose those things during the original VM installation process. So I'm going to click over here. Now, depending on the desktop, let me see. Okay, I didn't like that. Okay. Actually, no, cancel. That's not what I want to do. It's Tuesday, March the 8th. Wired connection. Anyhow, let's try it this way. In the GNOME desktop, okay, I don't want to turn on GNOME. So you can see, look at your wired connections. You can get to all this using the command line with ifconfig or the IP address command, or you can look at wired settings. I expect to see 1.10. Yes, okay, and it's not getting a DNS. That's fine. I go over here. This is my DHCP server. Let's see. Okay, so there are a few basic pieces of this puzzle. There's the file, a file probably named for the type of the server in etc default. In this case, it's isc-dhcp-server. There are a lot of DHCP servers. The plain Jane DHCP daemon, which is what Fedora used to use. The UDHCP daemon, which is what Ubuntu used to use and may still use. It's the BusyBox DHCP server. In any case, what I have here on this line right here, I have pre-declared what interface is going to be listening for DHCP discover and request broadcast messages, and which will consequently respond with DHCP offer and DHCP ACK. Remember, DHCP is a protocol which works by broadcast from the client side and by unicast from the server side, using ports 67 and 68, using both UDP and TCP. Now, the funny thing about this is that it is listening on these ports. But if I nmap this server from my other box, say the Kali system, I may see the OpenSSH port 22, but I will not see DHCP, possibly because it might be listening on UDP. Now, if I tell this to scan for UDP, I might get a whole other result. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is your scope declaration, and that is in etc DHCP /dhcpd.conf. What I'm going to do here actually is make some modifications. I'm going to start by commenting, actually Shift-I. Put myself in insert mode first, comment this line out, because I don't want to give it, point it at a domain server is called example.org, because A, I don't have a DNS server, and B, my DNS server is not going to be called example.org. it'll actually be called ns1.tstc.local. And I need to make this an authoritative server. If I want to set up syslog or something like that, I can set its log facility and level. And there are a number of different subnet declarations, from the very, very minimal, this one up here, which sets it to 10.152.187.0/24 and with nothing in it. Set it with a range, give it some routers. You could tell it, you could use a setup bootp. Now, DHCP and bootp, DHCP is in a sense the Bootstrap protocol's big brother. They use the same ports, they work in the same way, TCP and UDP both, ports 67 and 68. I used this one here because it has some more options. I set my subnet range, I set my exclusion range is what is by definition not mentioned here. In some DHCP configuration processes, you both set the pool, the least range, and also the exclusion range. Say if you're doing this with a Cisco iOS server, you have to set those excluded addresses first before you create the pool, or you will give away things that are in the pool. Always a very bad idea, particularly if you've got an interface listening on a subnet, say 192.168.1.1, and you don't exclude the address 1.1, because assuming it's your router, you may set it up as the default gateway with the default routers command. But if you don't exclude it, the DHCP server process is going to try to give that address away, and right off the bat, you've generated an address conflict on your subnet, which is a very bad thing. So I've got some routers, I've got my broadcast address, which is technically optional. I say technically optional because the protocol stack should be able to do the math. Looking at the subnet address 1.0 and the subnet mask 255.255.255.0, mathematically the broadcast address can only be 192.168.1.255. By definition, the broadcast address for any given subnet is that subnet with the interface portion of the address, the host portion of the address, set to all ones, because the broadcast address for anything is all ones. So I've got my default lease and my default range. I guess, you know what, if I wanted to crank this up, now let me do the math right quick. I want to make sure I get this right. If I want to make this 10 hours instead of 1 hour, I may just be able to add another 0 at the end of this, because leasing these things for an hour is better than leasing them for 10 minutes, but still it's severely suboptimal. So I'll do this math and be right back. Yes, so I did the math. I have increased my lease time by an order of magnitude. Now it will lease addresses for 10 hours, not 1, with a maximum lease time of 20 hours, not 2. So let me go down here. I did this both up here in my default lease times and set it for this specific range. You could also do things like set fixed addresses, so that, say for example, if you wanted a specific host to have a specific address all the time, on the basis of its host name, or its file name, or its Ethernet, or its hardware address, you could tell it to do that. Technically speaking, you can also do same sort of things in Cisco iOS. I don't want to do that right now. If you can, now the reason you might want to do this is if you've got a thin client, a dumb terminal, a diskless workstation, whatever you want to call it, that should have the same address every single time, but literally cannot store that configuration itself, you might have to do this. But this is the kind of workaround we don't need in this situation. Now, what I'm going to do now is save both these files. I've exited that one. Now, what I want to do now, is sudo DHCP-T. This will do a syntax check. Okay, should have been D. This will do a syntax check on the configuration file itself. And oh, by the way, it also tells me where my leases are. So let me go look for that. cd var lib DHCP so I see my leases. So if I less DHCP lease.leases, oh, not C less, I see 10 and 11 and 12. And I see, yeah, 3 different lease ranges. I see when they start, and we see when they end. I see that's an hour long. Yeah, those leases are an hour long. Yeah, so I see my Win10 client. I see my Kali box. I don't seem to see a host name for my server. My Metasploitable target system. I could also fire up my Win10 client. Actually, let me go do that. Fire up my Win10 client. Oh, okay, and actually I need to cancel. Okay, I need to change something first because I need to put this, move my Win10 client into the LAN segment. Okay, yes, and fire it up. I copy it. I've got a number of VMs over here. Okay, so Win10 is coming up. So let's go back here. Now, because I've made some changes, the changes that you make to a server do not take effect until you restart that server. So sudo service iscdhcp d server restart. Bam. And I'm going to check my status. Now, this doesn't have an immediate impact on my Kali and Debian 9 clients, but it might change things for how my Win10 client, which is just coming up, will obtain and maintain an IP address. So let me pause that while this thinks, and we'll check it in just a minute. Okay, so this is my Win10 client. I had actually had a problem getting into it because I had used a different default user password than usual. I think I built this one quite some time ago. But with go away. Go away. Okay, anyway, so I did ipconfig/all, which is the best way to look at that sort of thing in the Windows 10 environment. Of course, you can do a lot of the same things with PowerShell. Anyway, what I see here is that my mask is right, my gateway is right, my DNS server is right. Also, I'm looking at a 2-day lease time instead of a 2-hour lease time. What I can see on my Kali box, I did IP-AD show, and I can see my lifetime stated in apparently subtracting from 3,200 seconds. So what I'm going to do actually now is pause this, bounce this interface, and then see what happens. And it worked. So what I did, when I talk about bouncing an interface, I mean bringing an interface down and then right back up again with the IP-link set command. The IP address command sort of has a noun-verb grammar to it. So IP and then what you want to control. IP, then what you want to control, a link. What you want to do with it, set. What you want to handle, Ethernet 0. What you want to do to that, down. Down, back up, bounces. That causes, in effect, we're doing an ipconfig/release/renew without doing that. And I can see my lifetime, my LFT has gone from decrementing from 3,200 to decrementing from 36,000. And that's what I wanted to accomplish. Yay.